just under 2 years ago, I stood right here with a brand new RX 6900 XT, the first of the flagship Navi 2 cards. Navi 21 is what we know it as now. And that's actually this card right here. It has been phenomenal. So I showed you guys the ASRock Phantom Gaming and the reference. This is actually a gigabyte reference because it's a launch card, and there are certain restrictions with where AMD can sell its own reference cards. So this was picked up at Micro Center, but as you can see, that's just a decal on a very much AMD card. This thing, still a complete tank, no issues, the fans are still working beautifully, and I'll level with you, I bought this as a gamer and I gamed on it, but then shortly into January of 2021, Ethereum exploded. So this card has spent most of those 2 years in a mining rig, just humming away on Ethereum. These days, still running on Flux, but I took it out for today just to give us a size comparison, build comparison, and a few other things. If you already have a Navi 21 card and you're looking at getting a Navi, I think it's 31. But anyway, here's the box for an actual AMD reference card. I did not stand in line this time. I just lucked out online. So it's actually kind of neat. This box, it's a gimmick, total gimmick, but it actually lifts the card up and presents it to you as you open the box. Looks like we have a little bit of foam on the top of the PCI slot bracket. We've got a little rubber connector protector. It looks like the fans are the same size, still the same count and everything. Let me get this out of the box real quick and let's look at them side by side. Wow, okay, you don't actually notice it when you're looking at just one of these in a vacuum, but the new card is actually substantially longer. It's about an inch longer. Height-wise, it's about the same. It's maybe a hair taller, but we'll call it like a 2 1/4 slot card, maybe a 2 1/2 slot card. The fin stack is a little bit less obstructed on the 7000 series card, and it's a lot bigger. So this has the potential, it looks like, to dissipate heat a little bit more effectively. Oh, this has some very easy to get dirty texture on it, I can tell you that right now. Both of them have RGB lighting, both have twin 8-pin connectors, both have a total potential with the sliders cranked of about 300 watts, and that's just an inherent limitation. You get about 150 watts each out of these connectors when you have a straight up non-daisy chain 8-pin, and then you get up to 75 out of the slot, but they don't really do that. They'll pull about 290 out of here and they'll pull about 20 out of the slot, maybe a little bit more. So AIB cards, there's already shots of the Red Devil that has triple 8-pins that will bring cards up to 340 watts, and I'm guessing that will significantly pick up clock speeds and probably significantly improve the actual overall performance ceiling of these cards. I've heard some complaints about coil whine. We'll check on that too. Gamers Nexus, of course, did an awesome teardown on one of these bad boys. It does have a metal backplate, however, no thermal pads in it, so they're not using it to dissipate heat at all, which is just silly. They did that with the 6700 XT as well with the reference, so it's really easy to just pop off the backplate, throw some 2mm thermal pads on there, and you actually get significantly better memory temperatures. Guarantee that's the same on this card too, and these do actually struggle with memory temperatures right out of the box. They're hovering around 90 degrees Celsius while they game. Haven't tested any memory hard algorithms on it or anything like that, but there's a rough size comparison anyway with a 6900 XT, same size as the 6800 XT, and then of course our 7900 XTX. The I/O is actually really similar to the Navi 21 reference. They both included USB-C for DisplayPort, 2 DPs, and an HDMI. The difference is these are DisplayPort 1.4a, and these are 2.0 or 2.1, whatever the new standard is. That's just absurd. I believe this is still an HDMI 2.1. I think this was the first desktop graphics card launched to have that. So the HDMI spec I think is the same. They can both do like 4K 144 through that. But yeah, there's an overall size comparison. Looks like we got a little bit different layout for where the GPU support braces sit. The fans actually do look ever so slightly bigger. I don't have a caliper right here, otherwise I would measure them for you. But overall, you can tell they're both cards from the exact same family. I'll say that. So let me pop it in my 7700X test bed here, and let's do some tests on the 7900 XTX. All right, just waiting for it to power up here. The fans spin up right on boot, even before drivers load, so the VBIOS is definitely programmed to do that. I am using 2 dedicated strands from this power supply. We might run into OCP on this, because this is only a 600 watt PSU. This will run up to about 700 or 750 before it cuts out. But yeah, let's, like I said, let's boot into some software, see how it's recognized, see what sort of performance we get. Looks like the lights are on, which means hopefully we're getting a driver loaded. But yeah, it's a nice looking card. Okay, drivers are in. Detects in Windows just fine. I'm running a few updates. I do have 3D Mark installed, so we'll head into that shortly. Here is what GPU-Z sees. Looks like we have Hynix memory. Well, hopefully it's like the revision 4 stuff where it clocks absurdly high, but the power consumption is not great. So I'm curious to see if we ever get Samsung memory or even Micron on these cards, both of which are lower power consumption. Potentially not, but I really hope so. But yeah, we're showing, at least it's running at 4.0. Everything looks really good here. Rebar is enabled, so we should have good performance. Navi 31, there's confirmation. And yeah, once updates are done, I'll hop into 3D Mark and we'll take a look at some scores. So you can definitely hear the coil line on this thing. It's not as bad as the ARC A750. If you had this in a case with any sort of sound deadening and or you wore headphones, you wouldn't hear it at all. But it's worth noting that it's there, so I think AIBs are going to really take it and run and probably get rid of that, as they won't be forced into the same configuration. But I'm going to keep running my benches, and then I'll come back and show you guys what I end up with. I assume you can hear that. Really, it only seems to be prevalent when your frame rates are absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, if you're playing 1080p titles or older stuff, I would wait for an AIB card, I think. Okay, benchmarks are all done. Unfortunately, I don't have a Port Royal score for a 6900 XT, but a 2080 Ti looks like it's at 9250, and a 3080 was at 11,680, so 15,326. That does seem to kind of point to 3090 Ti levels of performance. Time Spy 23,864 versus 17,895 with the 6900 XT. That's worth noting that all that was done with the 5900X, and this is a 7700X. So the score is up a little bit just based on that, but graphics is 19,000 versus 28,000. So it's a big step up. Extreme is right below it. Looks like we have graphics scores. It's about 50% faster at 4K. Don't have, unfortunately, the same benchmarks for everything because they kind of change it around. VR Mark, we went from 13,662 to 19,684. I heard some serious coil whine in that, and the power consumption on 1080p seems to be highest. So I never saw over 503 watts at the wall with this combination, which again is a 7900 XTX reference and a 7700X on a 600 watt gold power supply. Beyond that, Cinebench R15's OpenGL test. It's a really low resolution test, so it's interesting. It works a completely different portion of the GPU over. Looks like we got 264 FPS on a 6900 and 415. So this thing's actually really good at low resolutions, much more so than Navi 21 was. And then Unigen superposition. So at 4K, optimized or balanced, 15,000 to 22,000. So a really big come up at 4K, and then like 60% up at 1080 extreme. So 10,800 versus 16,703. This card is no joke. In most workloads that I tested it in, is between 30 and 60% faster than a 6900 XT reference on launch day. Most of those benchmarks are running the exact same version of the software. In fact, even the same installer that I still have on my server. So there is a little bit of variation just moving up to 7700X. I was using PCIe Gen 4 and rebar with the 6900 XT test before. So it's as apples to apples as you can get with multiple systems. And there's nothing foolproof about this, but I did notice, like I said, the majority of the high power consumption tests were 1080p. This has a lot left on the table, I think, at 4K still, and doesn't surprise me. AMD cards do tend to get a little bit better with time and driver optimization and updates. The launch drivers are okay. I didn't have any issues with them running the benchmarks here today, but this card's pretty solid. I've actually already sold this one to a friend, so just doing some benchmarks before it goes back in the box and goes off to Florida, but I'll end up with another one. It's just I feel bad hoarding such a special card 2 days after launch. So hopefully that was a little bit informative. If not, whatever, you watched it. So thanks for watching, and that's the 7900 XTX. Oh, okay, one more thing. People are complaining about the idle power consumption while this thing's sitting on the desktop. Currently, this is reading 80 watts, and normally, with no GPU, it reads 60 watts. So I think if that was an issue to begin with, it isn't anymore with this driver release or something, but idle power consumption, in my opinion, is not a concern. Okay, now I'm actually done.